Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Beast of Burn podcast. It's your host, Jesse Knox. Beast of Burn is brought to you by Doubletree Habitat Enhancement, Inc. We do forestry services, habitat consultations, and also provide real estate services. So if I can help you sell your land or help you look for one, please reach out to me at jesse.knox@basecampcountry.com. For any habitat inquiries or forestry inquiries, please reach out to jknox0623@gmail.com. Also, you can find me on Instagram, just at Beast of Burn Podcast, all one word. Find me over there with some shorts and also those questions. You can DM me over there. If you wish the show to grow, head on over to iTunes or Spotify and please leave a 5-star review and a positive comment if you deem it so worthy. Also have a small, stagnant YouTube channel, but there's some good stuff over that way. I'm honored to have a awesome deer biologist. I love his stuff on Instagram with wildlife investments. We have Moriah Bogges, who has a bachelor's in science at North Carolina State University and master's of science in Mississippi State University. Currently working as a deer biologist with wildlife investments. Moriah, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing good, Jesse. Been looking forward to this talk.
Yeah, well, I want to give you a shout out because when you answer my question on that drone aerial spraying, we had that conversation back in August. You've really opened up my doors of possibilities with my farm instead of going like, this is going to be a begrudging journey to like, man, we can make some serious changes really
Yeah,
quick. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I've piddled around with the drone stuff myself, and I prefer when someone else is running the drone these days.
yeah, same
It's a
here.
frustrating business, but yeah, the man the herbicide world. I think that's one thing that sometimes people underestimate just what you can accomplish with herbicides sometimes. And I mean, I'm
Respectfully,
like
yes.
most people, I think I get nervous about the overuse of herbicides, but there's
Yep.
also some cases, especially with invasives or encroachment of even some native species where, you know,
Mm,
you're just kicking a rock uphill if
yes,
you're just coppicing or mulching or whatever. It's just going to keep rolling back on you, and you're in the same position every time until you
exactly.
take care of it with herbicides. So there's a
Right.
time
Well,
and place.
exactly. We did a test with a gentleman. We had like 5.5 acres across our creek, and I've been very neglectful. It's been very hard to get over there. And built a creek crossing, got over there, put my fire brakes in. I'm like, this is a disaster. So I hired this drone gentleman, and I had him spray Roundup, Escort, and Gunslinger. And within a week, everything was just scorched earth, you know. And we're gonna
Mm,
burn it this March to hopefully clean up a lot of the dead box elders and stuff like that, because we're going to actual nicer quality tree planting in there. And then we're going to try to use Duracore and triclopyr on a black locust stand. That seemed like the most effective herbicide, but the most compliant with that soil type. So I'm
yeah.
curious what it's going to do, but I'm also like, I just told the gentleman, look, man, if it doesn't work, it's no skin off my nose. It's an experiment. Let's just see how it rolls.
Yeah,
So I want to say thank you for your time on that. That meant a lot to me that day.
absolutely. And I love hearing back too on what's working because at the end of the day, with herbicides, I don't. It's tough to admit how much of it is really experimentation. There's some
Yes.
herbicides that are like they're kind of a done deal. You know what you're going
Yep.
to get, but I mean, I've even sprayed like glyphosate on herbaceous plants that should
Mm-hmm.
absolutely kill them, but there was poor conditions and it was really droughty and
Yep.
it didn't kill them. And so
Yep.
there's just so many different factors. Like you mentioned soil type and obviously vegetation, the components, the species, their size and whether they're resprouts or if they're just freshly germinated, trees that are a year or two old. It all makes a huge difference. So
Absolutely.
it always is. It's just kind of one experimentation. So if you go into it with that mindset, I think you can always learn a lot.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm always curious how people get in their professions. You're originally from the state of Virginia, correct?
I'm actually from North Carolina.
North
Yeah.
Carolina. Okay, I'm sorry. I have a hard time
I'm
keeping
all over
everything
the place.
straight.
Don't worry. Yeah.
The South is your home. The whole area, huh? The region.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you grew up hunting North Carolina, I take it.
Yeah. I grew up kind of in the foothills mountain area
Mm,
hunting there.
wow. Did you do
Yeah.
much black bear hunting?
I have hunted, I've never successfully killed. I have
Gotcha.
had so many bears in on me while hunting, but it's always outside of season.
Oh, bummer, man. That's cool to see
Yeah.
one though. So,
Yeah.
so what led you to go to school for biology? Just a natural curiosity and just a love of the land, or what's kind of your story?
Yeah. My family was a fishing family growing up. Actually, no one in my family hunted. And so
Interesting.
I always knew I wanted to be in the like natural sciences. And I used to think I wanted to be a fisheries biologist. And then in my early teens, I found a shed, and that kind of opened my eyes to like this cool world that was all around me, because we lived out in the country of deer. And I introduced myself to hunting and killed my first deer at 13 or 14, something like that. And from
Nice.
there, I was like, okay, this is where I want to work. And I started, you know, immediately after that, piddling into some, quote unquote habitat improvements. I didn't have really a clue, but I had a lot of fun with it, and
Mm-hmm.
started to learn some stuff. And I would say all through undergrad, I had my eye on doing something similar to what I do now, but really didn't understand my path there, or yeah, even a lot of what I was talking about, or what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to work in deer management and habitat management. And as I progressed through my education, I started to realize how much I loved plant ID and
Mm-hmm.
plant community management. And so, even when I look back, even from a young age, like always loved the garden, I always loved plants, and just it's such a natural connection when you think about deer management, because
Yes.
if you're managing habitat for a large herbivore, you are managing plants. The deer
Exactly.
is
It
just
should
like,
be.
that's just kind of, yeah, it's like the tertiary payoff at the end. Like
Right.
it's all about you working with the soil and plants, and then from there you get the habitat for the deer. And so I love that component of it. And whenever I've realized that kind of connection of those two, I think that's where I realized what I really wanted to do and ended up
That's
here.
really awesome. That's so cool. So when you went from North Carolina to Mississippi, what was kind of was it strictly just biology was kind of your degree title, or did you actually start specializing with just habitat management, or did you do other things during that schooling in Mississippi, for example?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to work in like deciduous hardwoods.
Mm,
And that was one thing. Whenever I went to Mississippi, I was like, I know
mm,
I had a lot to learn about pine management and all, but
mm,
I always enjoyed upland hardwoods. And so um, I did my master's research on upland hardwood masting and fire. And there was several different iterations of my project, but yeah, in the end, my project was actually on like masting and how deer respond to that, and then
mm.
another side experiment on fire and how that affects acorn consumption. And but my interest all along through there was habitat management. So I was fortunate enough to go to Mississippi State and work with Dr. Marcus Lashley
Oh yeah.
and Bronson Strickland, both of them professors in the deer lab. And so
Hmm.
I really enjoyed my time there. I really enjoyed the extension component of working there. I got to manage, their public channels like the social media and stuff like that, and have just kind of always enjoyed taking information and taking that to the public.
Right.
And when it's habitat management information, it's even that much more fun.
Absolutely. So, and that which Herbert Stoddart, I read his book. Well, the biography of Herbert from I forget Albert, I forget his last name. It was the conservation of the southern longleaf pine and that whole
Mhm.
history. And that's one thing I'm kind of jealous of down south, warmer winters. But number two, those pine savannas are just so beautifully unique. What was some
Yeah.
big, besides obviously coniferous versus deciduous, what was kind of the big um, takeaways from going from an upland management system down to a pine system, or trying to restore pine savannas in that regard?
Yeah. I haven't got to work a whole lot in proper pine,
Mm.
savanna restoration.
Oh, okay.
In my undergrad, I did get to work on a military base, Fort Bragg in eastern North Carolina. That's got a
Cool.
wonderful longleaf pine,
Mm.
management system. I was obviously a spectator there. We were doing bird surveys, but that was kind of my first introduction of seeing a very well managed longleaf pine forest, and it's beautiful.
Absolutely.
It has different quality. If we're here to talk about deer in some way, if we just shift the deer for a second,
Sure.
longleaf pines are the plant communities that longleafs generally do well in aren't the most productive ones for deer. Now,
Really.
big deer can come from there when the deer densities are low enough.
Hmm.
They hold deer, but they're a cover limited system, and they're very grass dominated. That is the natural state for the most part. Is you're going to have a lot of wiregrass. That's sort of the major understory composition, and you're going to have some gallberry, and then you're going to have some other waxy leaf species. But those are, I would say, gallberry, wiregrass, and longleaf pine are kind of the obligates in that system as far as the plants that you're going to see the most of. And so if and this was me early on, when you step into that and you think about it through the lens of a too focused on deer, you
Mm,
don't see the value in the greater picture here, right? And so,
hmm.
but
Right.
spending some time there,
Right.
seeing some of the other species, like I was working with, that was my first wildlife job, and it was just a summer job in my undergrad, and I was doing
Hmm.
Bachman sparrow surveys. But that's a longleaf pine obligate songbird, and so without longleaf pines, those birds go away.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so I think that was one of the things, is working some of those different systems and starting to appreciate the value of them, for
Absolutely.
different reasons. But
Right.
when I went to Mississippi State, that's a lot more loblolly down there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the thing that really hit me hard there, coming from sort of the Appalachians and the Piedmont of North Carolina, was that when you get into loblolly management, it's so similar. I mean, it is a crop, but it's so similar to even a 1 year crop like corn or soybeans.
Oh, wow.
It's just a little bit longer time scale, but
Right.
taking silviculture down there and being, on some of these big production forests, like Weyerhaeuser forests and the like, and you start to see, I mean, on paper, it's all laid out. This year we plant, or
Hmm.
this year we do site prep. This year we
Yeah.
plant. This year's the first thinning, the second thinning, and so on. And then they might
Mm-hmm.
have some mid-story work in there, depending on the quality of the trees. And then that's it, and it resets. And then it kind of takes, from a forestry management standpoint, if we were talking not about wildlife at all, it takes a
Hmm.
lot of the guesswork out of it. I mean, it's kind of
Sure.
boilerplate. And I
Yeah.
know there's,
Yep.
if any forester were to listen to that, they probably roll their eyes, because I know there's a lot more to it. And when you start to talk
Right.
about um, forest product production, there's all
Hmm.
kinds of genetic work being done, and there's all
Right.
kinds of mid rotation management that happens, like pruning and all these different things they do to try to
Mm.
get the kind of quality product that they want. And so there's all kinds of those decisions happening. But I guess what I'm saying is, the scale of those decisions is much larger than with hardwoods. You got it.
Right.
You're making single trees decisions in most cases when it comes to hardwoods.
Exactly. Right. Right. And I would think, I'm in kind of Oak Savannah biota, and you get attached to those individual trees versus a
Yeah.
crop rotation, or however you want to call it, or treating pine trees as a crop. And I kind of wish we had that mentality up here. I think we could save more of our timbers, but it they just grow so differently than a pine,
Yeah.
And also, I remember my foresters have told us in the 70s up here in Iowa, they were really pushing pine trees for a crop, but no one's set up to handle the sap, and they didn't have
Right.
great markets. So you have all these pine trees. Like, it's kind of neat. Quick side story: I live on my wife's family farm, and my her grandmother planted pine trees. God, in the 30s or 40s, and man, they're gigantic now, and it's just kind of
Hmm.
cool to see that. I don't think she intended to be a conservationist at all. She's a farmer's wife, but just seeing that tree grow outside of her house, you think of her. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I've done some TSI and pine stands with foresters like, yeah, thin them out. You're girdling these gigantic pine trees that there's no market for, and like, this is weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, that's interesting. No, it's interesting. And it's cool that they have that, but also I come across so many herbicide labels that specifically are designed for pines or used in pines, and it just seems just
Hmm.
as aggressive in that rotation as you would a corn and soybean rotation in the Midwest, it appears.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, when we were talking about herbicide labels, there's a lot of that research has been focused on pine plantation,
Right.
because,
Mm-hmm.
well, there's of course the selectivity situation issue when you come to managing hardwoods. Like, it's really hard to be selective with hardwoods and
Yes.
when herbicides. But yeah, I mean, so many of those herbicides have been designed specifically for pine
Right.
rotation for us. And yeah, it's an interesting thing when you start talking about the markets you mentioned there, because I mean, I'm starting to see some of that in the South as well. But it doesn't matter how great of a quality of tree you have, unless it's like a veneer black walnut or
Right.
white oak or something, you can
Yep.
afford to haul it. Unless it's something like that, that it is spatially dependent on, there has to be a market nearby.
Yes.
And like there's a landowner I work with in Mississippi, and he, recently was paying somebody to cut saw timber pines they were plantation pines that had been planted, long before he bought the property. And 16 to 18-inch diameter trees, great quality saw timber just getting laid down. He was paying to have it laid down into burn piles to burn because there's no market to
Oh gosh.
have someone actually come and take them for a commercial market nearby. I've
Wow.
seen that on actually more properties than I like to see down there, and
Huh.
even even on properties where we can get a timber crew in right now, it oftentimes is a couple years, and then
Mm,
like gone are the days of the 20-acre thin of pines and all that. I mean, we're
mm,
talking 100 acres, 150 acres, and in
gotcha.
cases where we have smaller landowners trying to pool landowners together
Right.
just to get a timber harvester out there, and they're not paying well, and even in that situation.
Interesting. No, that's a big problem up here in the Midwest with, for example, Eastern red cedar. I mean, you come across all these potential markets, but I mean, they just don't pay worth your time, and you're way ahead of the game if your goal is like, I want oak regen, I want better wildlife habitat. You're way ahead of the game playing for cost share and just mulching, burning, moving on with your life. But I've done a lot of TSI, my timber this winter, and you feel kind of sinful after a while because it's like, I have all these elm trees, and there is a small firewood market in this area, but it's like to justify my time to go cut, split, deliver, I'm way ahead
Yeah,
just dropping the trees and just let it be soil matter at the end of the day. And
yeah,
one thing my forester is really trying to work with is trying to find like some kind of pulpwood market. And we just
mhm,
don't have it. We have the material and we have overstock timber for what we have left, but it's just how do you justify a mill setting up shop and go to these little timber draws to actually make it profitable for them and also give a landowner satisfaction
yeah,
of like, oh, my timber ground can be productive in some way they
yeah,
deem productive. So
yeah,
it's kind of the ugly side of conservation, but it's like, well, what do? Do you just let it become stagnant and not develop anything at all, and then invasives come in, or do you actually have to sacrifice something for a better generation to come?
yeah, yeah. When it comes to the pulp markets, I mean, even over here in the Appalachians, it's limited,
I'm
and
sure.
I mean, there's areas that aren't served because you're not going to get even when you're close to mill, like you're not going to get paid all that much for
Right.
pulpwood,
Right.
and so it ends up being where there's a lot of factors if I were to looking, in different counties to buy land. But that is one of those factors. If there's a land, someone aspiring to purchase property and you're in a state where there are pulp mills or you can move to a state where there's a pulp mill, that is a factor. That is 100% a
Interesting.
factor because just think about it. If you had good markets, now I don't know many people making decisions based on that because normally they have other
Oh
higher
yeah.
ranking priorities. They want
Right.
to be close to something or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
But it can make all the difference of so much time that you're going to have to spend, money you're going to have to spend,
Yep.
and then if you're lucky enough to be close enough to a mill where you can actually turn a little bit of a little bit of income from it, that can fund other things, and
Right.
that's just makes a world of difference, especially when you're doing it over 50 or 100 acres.
Exactly. Exactly. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Something to definitely consider. And most people don't even think about that at all. I would,
Yeah,
probably you would, because it's a
you
problem
you'd
down
have
the road,
you'd have to talk to those local foresters really
Right.
to get that intel.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you earned your master's at Mississippi, and then did you get in the workforce right away as the state biologist for North Carolina, Indiana, or did that take some time before you got in those positions?
So I went pretty much directly to Indiana.
I see.
Had a couple months there, kind of in between. But started Indiana DNR in the fall of 2020, and was there about a year, and then I moved to North Carolina
Mm,
and took the same job as deer biologist down there. So whenever I was in Indiana, I met my wife there. We moved for North Carolina is actually where I was from, and
mm,
some other personal reasons to get back down there, and we were down there for a couple of years,
I
and I
see.
worked for the state there, and I enjoyed both those jobs a lot. Definitely learned a lot about the inner workings of agencies, and enjoyed everything that I learned there around the larger scale management of deer. It's we're not talking about from the deer biologist perspective. Now they have a lot of good. Those agencies do have a lot of good biologists that handle habitat management. Those are generally the district biologists.
Mm,
But my job was statewide, and so and it was essentially a population and hunter management job, right? I worked
mm,
on framing regulations, changing regulations, the regulation digest. It's a lot of that kind of stuff, human dimension surveys, population monitoring and the like. And so I definitely learned a lot there and enjoyed it. But I think I enjoy the habitat management and land,
Mm.
land management side of things a lot better.
Right, right. So we're kind of, I see. Yeah, this might be kind of a repetitive question, but were those kind of the key? Well, I got my, sorry, brain's going overdrive. What were some of the key takeaways from being in those positions for both those states? Mainly just kind of learning from that human influence and human emotional decision making, or what were some other things that were eye opening, or you're able to take to down with your career?
Yeah, I guess first off, I'm way more forgiving of
Mm.
people in those roles, especially as now I've been a few years on the other side of just being a hunter, and yeah, it annoys me when the cost of licenses go up, and every time that happens, I'm entertained by looking at all the Facebook comments of people complaining about it. But and they think those agencies are raking in money, but having
They're
been on the
not.
other side, they're barely keeping up with inflation at best
Exactly.
with those
Right.
license increases. So that was because I didn't necessarily work on the license increase side when I was there, but I
Hmm.
got to see all those reports and the economic
Exactly.
studies and stuff, and it was alarming to see in some of those cases, like how far behind we were with keeping up with inflation. So
Mm.
now when I'm a hunter, I like to send my buddy the deer biologist to be like, oh, y'all went up on prices. I can't believe it, but it's just a joke because
Right.
obviously I want to be a good contributing hunter to the resource. And so that was another thing is like and I don't want to sound too jaded about it, but from the deer biologist perspective, it seemed like probably 80% of hunters are pretty happy and pretty understanding and willing to contribute and do their part.
Right.
But then there's the 20% that or 10%, whatever it is, that just want to they complain about everything and aren't happy about things. And I get it when it comes to regulation changes, it never serves everybody. There's always
Right.
winners and losers,
Yep.
and agencies are just trying to manage the whole, and so you're always going to upset people.
Yep. Yep.
But that's just kind of that's the way it shakes out, and when you're on the losing side, it's easy to complain, but at the end of the day, I see people I'll go back to license fee increases, complaining about that, but a lot of these same people love to claim that they're quote unquote conservationists, but they're not happy contributing to the conservation model. And so I think there's a healthy amount of disagreement to be had, and that's why there's public input and all those sort of things. And it doesn't always go our way, but there's also other things happening behind the scenes, and things trying to that they're trying to weigh obviously a lot of different competing objectives. And so I'd say at the end of the day, I'm just a little bit more forgiving of understanding
Mm.
when something that large is being managed, that it's not going to serve the interests of every person. And that was the most of what I got from the public calls and emails and the
Mm.
like would be, we need to reduce our buck bag limit, or reduce doe bag limits, or antler point restrictions, or this, that, and the other. But the truth of the matter is, and I can't speak for all agencies, but you know, uh, talking to biologists from different agencies, and in general, most agencies, I feel like, even if they're not saying it, most of them are managing for opportunity. They are
Exactly.
managing
Right.
for people to be able to go buy a license and hunt. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want? I want
Exactly.
my future kids to be able to go hunt. And
Right.
I really don't want the dude down the street that's upset because they shot a 2-year-old to be able to, limit their opportunity and limit
Right.
their ability to partake in the sport. And so agencies as a whole in general manage so that people have a lot of opportunity to get out and hunt.
Hmm.
And that's probably where we need them, right? We don't need them
Exactly.
getting in everybody's business as to shoot that buck and don't shoot the other. But
Right.
the people that are calling for that, at the root of the problem, is that they want the agency to control other people but not control them. That's what it always goes back
Yes.
to. And
Right.
so if you can kind of look at it that way and be like,
Yep.
okay, who am I trying to control? And then would I like it if they did the opposite to me? It's probably better if they just manage for opportunity, and then we manage ourselves property
And
level.
that's kind of the whole point of this podcast, is to really make people think about being accountable and having that personal responsibility as land stewards. And even those that don't own land, I'm like, look, I know our deer and our guys here in our Sagima wildlife unit, there's only, I want to say, 4 or 5 hired and a few seasonal employees. They manage 14,000 acres across Southeast Iowa. You can go
Yeah.
volunteer. It's like, I'm sure if you were licensed, put a backpack sprayer on, or trained to go do a burn once or twice a year just to help out, you can contribute in that way. And those guys like, hell yes, let's get to work. But as
Yeah.
landowners, I know a lot of guys that own land, and I get really frustrated because it kind of falls in the exact same mentality you just described. I want someone else to fix my problems. But what I try to do, and I feel like you're doing the same thing, is to inspire others. No, you have the power to make a change. I've sat in on those annual DNR hearings, and I just see the finger pointing and very little like look yourself in the mirror every day and go, what can I do to make a difference? And I get so frustrated. These poor DNR guys are getting raked over the coals, and I'm like, they're just managing our public lands. They can take the
Yeah.
input in, report back, but it's like, guys complain about raccoons. Well, change your habitat to support less raccoons. Do a
Yeah.
burn, do a timber harvest. Do you have the ability? And like, I don't know about Virginia, Indiana, or North Carolina, but we have several private lands biologists and private foresters that serve private lands that are there to help you achieve your goals, paid by our licenses and tags. They're giving back
Right.
that way. So there's,
Yeah.
and it should be encouraging. Like, oh wow, and it doesn't take very long to make a very impactful difference on a small farm or a large farm.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you look at the bigger picture, none of us, well, really all of us have the best hunting in the last couple generations. I mean, we can
Absolutely.
go back
Amen.
hundreds of years and we don't really know what was going on, but as of the last couple hundred years, it is the best time to be a whitetail hunter. Yeah, there's little things going on here and there, right? We've got some issues. We have bad EHD years. We've got CWD in spots. Like there's all different things going on that we can boo-hoo about. But the NDA puts out their deer report every year, and the biologists at the state agencies, the data they're collecting indicates that in general the age structure is better than it's ever been if we're looking at adult deer. And as far as numbers of deer, we have more deer than we've ever had whitetail deer, at least. If you look at, there's little fluctuations year to year in states, and there's a couple states with a little bit different trend, especially in like the Appalachians and stuff. But overall, there's more deer than ever. And so just imagine all the things that we get so nitpicky about in the whitetail hunting community now. And then can you imagine taking that back 40 or 50 years and telling your grandpa that we're arguing because the neighbor shot a 3-year-old and he's like, I saw a 2-year-old once in 10 years of hunting.
Exactly.
And so
Right.
I think this is where I come to. It's like everybody will always have something they're not happy about. And I think that in general, like that's good. As humans, we're always looking to improve. We're always looking to get better. But where it's the downfall is when we take it too far and then
Yep.
we want to try to limit other people. Um, when at the end of the day, like you really do want other people hunting. Because if
Exactly.
I was the only one to hunt in the US, I probably wouldn't be hunting. I wouldn't be allowed to hunt. I'd be in a
Kind of
jail,
lonely,
right? Yeah, yeah. So like we do need each other and we've got it so good.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
And there's some parts like Iowa, Western Iowa is facing a deer drought. It's pretty bad, but there are things that can be done to make big improvements. And I always believe it, habitat first. So,
Yeah.
and again, it just goes back like, yeah, I feel like in my neck of the woods in Southeast Iowa, it's still amazing. But also, I put the work in to make sure it stays that way. Let those good times keep rolling. Other properties
Right.
that landowners might live next door. Technically, they're absentee on their residents, and their farms are just slowly devaluating. And you're like, oh. So, but no,
Yeah.
it's a group effort. And I don't know. I just take that whole role of conservation as such a fun and a great honor to be a part of, and just to make that change. And yeah, I just really click with people that think that way too. But no, absolutely, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. Some areas of the country might argue, but other parts I'm like, I agree with Moriah. It's looking pretty damn good right now. So
Yeah.
from your position as a deer biologist, what was a transition to wildlife investments?
I so I went directly from North Carolina to wildlife investments, and so I went from worrying about what the whatever regulation changes we had in the public proposals and
Hmm.
like that constant hamster wheel of which I did enjoy, but statewide, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just regulatory statewide. And if you really get down to the nuts and bolts, those regulations, not to belittle them, they are important.
Yep.
But most of the time, if you go from $2 to $3, or
Uh-huh.
it has very little effect. Same with
Exactly.
the doe
Yep.
harvest stuff. Like we looked at that in Indiana. There's some counties where you could shoot 6 does, and people would get all undone about that because you could go to the
Really?
next county and shoot 4, and you could do that all. Used to be. It's actually just changed with the regulations finally went through in the last year. It used to be that you could jump to every county and shoot their doe limit. So we would get complaints every year. Oh,
Huh.
people can shoot 200 does in Indiana. No wonder we don't have any deer. Well, the the average number of deer, I think, per hunter harvest is like 1.3, something like
Yeah.
that. And
Right.
it was
Hmm.
within a point 10 in North Carolina. I mean, it's still right around 1.3 deer.
Hmm.
The truth of the matter is, most people only have so much time to hunt.
Yep.
They only have so much harvest opportunity. Um, there's big changes that happen in the regulations, I guess is my point. It doesn't
Yep.
always lend itself to major changes on the ground. They're
Right.
very
Right.
broad. We're looking at
Yep.
just some really big changes, or really broad, small changes
Yep.
across the landscape, with harvest. And that's what's driving those decisions at the state level. So then I go to wildlife investments, and now, I'm working on individual properties.
Exactly.
And so, instead of looking at the whole state and however many, square miles that is, it's like 1 square mile is this property, and trying to get it, fully tricked out. Where do we want to cover? Where do we want to be managing more for forage and that sort of thing? And so, that's probably the biggest shift for me, is just that size of
Mm.
what I'm worrying about, the scale of management.
Mm-hmm.
And it, in some ways, is easier to think smaller, and in other ways
Mm.
it's more frustrating
Right.
because you're just looking through this little window on the landscape, trying to move the needle, pull the levers, do all that kind of stuff, but you're also dependent on the landscape around you. And
Exactly. Right.
yeah,
No,
I'd say that's a huge difference.
exactly. Well, sure, absolutely. Well, that's kind of also too like that connection of setting those deer quotas and people see them and they kind of freak out. But it's like, again, it just comes down to that individual influence. I mean, what one guy can do, one farm do or not do, that's a huge influence on their overall thing. So it's like, I think people see that number and they freak out, but it's like, well, what is your farm or neighbor's farm or grandparents' farm, whatever you're hunting on? It's like, what, have you done a deer survey? Have you seen what's actually your farm can support, the land you hunt on can support, versus looking at
Yeah.
his overall number and having a freak out? So, no, that must have
Yeah.
been a lot more fun to go from that stress of those regulatory numbers and then going to working with private landowners that really want to make that positive difference in the landscape.
Yeah. There were things about the state agency that I really liked. I
Mm-hmm.
love doing public meetings, believe it or not. I love when people would call, and have questions and talk and all. I love talking to hunters. I would love going and doing disease check stations, because I would go
Oh,
to a
cool.
processor and pull, 80 samples in a
Right.
day, and get to talk to 80 hunters and see their deer. And,
I
and
see.
like, that's the funnest part of the job, because
Gotcha.
you're communicating with somebody on their best day in the
Yes.
deer woods,
Yep.
because they just brought their buck, they're all fired up. You're
Right. Right.
the only downside is that normally that was like opening day, and I was at the check station and I couldn't be hunting. And so now, doing what I do, I have a lot more flexibility to hunt, which is probably one of the biggest pros in the world, that you could ask for. But yeah, there's a lot of good things from the agency, and a lot of things
Absolutely.
that I definitely enjoyed. But yeah, now, I mean, the number of people I have to work with every year is smaller, but I'm working with them a lot more closely, as
Yes.
we're working through their property and making decisions.
Gotcha. Awesome. So this part I'm really excited about is talking about deer browse because I find it, and I hope I'm not coming across too negative. It seems like there's two different hunting cultures, the Midwest versus the South. And I can't speak for all of that, but I meet a lot of guys that are on the food plot train. It's the only way to hold deer is through the food plot. But then through listening to guys like you, Dr. Lashley, Dr. Goldsby, my own private lands biologist who's retired, foresters, there's this whole beautiful world on the landscape of native browse and the native plant communities that have so much value to our wildlife. And it's so encouraging for me to see that, like, wow, you don't have to,
Yeah.
I consider food plot subsistence feeding. To me, it's no different. I mean, there's a lot more work in the food plot. It can benefit other wildlife as well, but it's like, man, you can feed a lot of deer with that browse. So is that a challenging aspect when you work with private landowners to encourage like what you're calling weeds is essential to a deer's diet?
Yeah, it sometimes is, but honestly, I'm probably spoiled with the kind of landowners I get to work with. A lot of times when they hire our group, we a lot of the guys we work with have, that so like Dr. Strickland or Lashley, some of the
Right.
guys on our team, they've listened to their podcast for years, and they're like,
Yes.
I want you guys, I want one of you to come and do it on my property. And so
Right.
a lot of the people we work with are probably already to that stage, but
Right.
once in a while we do get people, and I'm starting at, stage one where I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
these are called weeds, but really I'm talking about, they're actually forbs. So
Yep.
when I say forbs, I really just mean a broadleaf, not a grass, and kind of start there and work back. And it's really most gratifying when they take a leap
Hmm.
and then they start to see deer use those areas more.
Right.
And,
Right.
and so I do really enjoy that. But it is kind of crazy when on the hunting media, how much you see people still talk about, oh, I saw a comment the other day that was like I don't know, a big buck or something. It's like, I can't believe he lived here. That's nothing but, it's nothing but woods. There's no ag for, tens of miles or something like that.
Who would have thunk?
Um, yeah. All right. It's like deer. What did they eat until we planted corn? I don't. So sometimes I kind of think that in the back of my head. I'm like, what would deer do, right, without our ag?
Exactly.
And, and don't get me wrong. Like I love for a warm season food plot. In the South, we don't have a lot of soybeans. Well, soybeans are a wonderful warm season food
Oh,
plot.
sure.
And
Yep.
there's crops I manage where we do corn and that kind of stuff. So I'm not hating on that, but yeah, there is
No.
definitely an over focus on like
Exactly.
it's got to come from a bag for a deer to eat it. It's kind of like the people in the neighborhood. They're like, what would the deer eat if I didn't fill up my bird feeder with corn? They're falling for the exact same,
Yep. Yep.
flawed logic. So, but yeah, I love. I think the coolest thing about habitat management is that you're in a lot of ways restoring plant communities back to a more similar state of what they would have traditionally
Yep.
been, and you're feeding deer what they really need to eat. So
Exactly.
a lot of the properties I work with do supplemental feeding through the summer.
Mm.
I always tell them, the upsides and the downsides, it's your decision, but I'm going to help you focus on producing this food way cheaper. And if we think about it, deer aren't made to eat a pellet. Deer are
Right.
made to eat leaves. That's what they're
Yep.
made to digest. They are built for
Exactly.
picking through a plant community
Yep.
and finding what they need to eat. And so, yeah, I don't know where you want to go with this conversation, but I'm
Anywhere.
down for whatever.
Anywhere. Yeah. No. And that's the thing. I do feel like from my experience in land management for the past, God, 14 years, there is an element of control. And it's like I can have this control and I can guarantee success because you meet people. I mean, I don't know how many people you work with that are absentee landowners, but most of my clientele have been absentee. So when they are, and they can't even consistently hunt their property, you got to put the preference points in as non-residents. So it's like they want to guarantee they're going to have a successful hunt. So they're going to put more of their farm income on a food plot, go with a high fertilizer, spray the heck out of it, guarantee at this time because they know from previous hunts that's been most successful. But it's like, but there's a big broader world that can really. And the clients
Yeah,
I've been working with recently, they're like, yeah, man, they've seen the difference in one season. In one season, and it's like that is so encouraging to see that, and I'm hoping to use that more as a kind of like a domino effect. This guy's doing the
yeah,
next guy, blah blah blah. So no, and it's like I know it's on my own farm, removing the cedars and burning. God, man, it's like I have both browse and cover, and it's
yeah,
like you can't beat that. And even we've had significant amount of snow. It really hasn't knocked down the plant communities are out there. I mean, most of it's been
right.
goldenrod, and it seems to have its own standability. And I got prairie on my place too. It's more of a monoculture. We've had that conversation before, but I've just been so blown away by the difference, and just from one burn.
Yeah, yeah. I so I do some work in the Midwest. Like I said, I used to live in Indiana. I do some consulting work up there, and obviously over here in Virginia, and then down in the deep South. And what a lot of management comes out of the deep South. I mean,
Yes, it does.
Auburn, UGA,
Yep.
Mississippi State, right? You got all these schools that have done a lot of research, and so um, what you have to understand about in the deep south is we are not cover limited for the most part,
Right.
unless you are on the
Exactly.
crappiest property, which they exist.
Yep.
You're not cover limited. And then even where I'm at in Virginia, like if you don't do anything in Virginia in the mountains, like you're going to have mountain laurel and rhododendron, you're not going to be able to see
Mm,
anything. Like
I
you're going to
see.
always have cover, but you're not going to have food. And so
Right.
a lot of the focus, and rightfully so, on these properties in the deep south is on growing forage. And so,
Yep.
like in our pine management, like we were talking about herbicides a minute ago, we use the heck out of imazapyr down here to
Hmm.
kill, red maple and sweet gum,
Mm.
and we'll mix in other stuff when we're dealing with elm. And that's really just to remove woody competition because we're trying to grow forage. Um,
Yes.
the woody competition still comes. I mean,
Right.
even if you keep up with fire, you start to get a little encroachment. And truth be told, my ideal mix would have, my ideal understory in one of those pine forests, 20% coverage or so of woody,
Yep.
or maybe a little bit less, but right in there. I wouldn't
Yep.
have it just herbaceous. I've been on some
Yep.
places like that, and they lack
For
they lack
shrubs.
kind
Yep.
of holding power.
Yep.
Yeah. And so when you get some of those little blocks in there, deer definitely bed in it more and all. But um anyway, so there's that side of it in
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
south where we're just hyper fixated on producing forage. Then you go to the Midwest, and there I'm hyper fixated on woody cover because I
Mm.
want browse, like you're
Yep.
talking about, for
Yep.
sure. In winter, super important, but also cover. And at least in Indiana, the central hardwoods there, wherever you are in the Midwest, like the hardwood component is different. When you get into
Hmm.
North Indiana, you get near the lakes, you get a lot more understory, you get a lot more standing water, and you get a lot more dogwood. You just get more
Mm-hmm.
natural cover. In Southern Indiana, and I don't want to speak for other places. I don't know what
Yeah.
exactly it is over where you're at. In Southern Indiana, there's very little cover. I mean, it's
Mm.
just it grows really good oaks, veneer quality
Wow.
hardwoods, but it doesn't have a lot of cover underneath. And so in that landscape, my main focus is like just cover, 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 cover. I'm
Right.
I'm just
Right.
trying to get woody sprouts on the ground. And I'm not mad for sure at having some forbs in there, but that's not necessarily my focus,
Sure.
And so
Interesting.
it it definitely it definitely has to change depending on where you're at. And so I'm sure in Iowa it's got to be a cover focus as
Oh,
well.
yes. Yeah.
Not only is permanent cover limited on the landscape, but it's probably also limited underneath those trees in most
Oh,
forests.
absolutely. For sure. We have a lot of shade tolerant species, your ironwood and elm. They just thrive underneath those mature canopies. And,
Yeah.
what I try to do, I'm going to stand, if it's a single monoculture of like bitternut hickory, I'm going to hack and squirt the heck out of it because we know there's a seed bank there. They're going to come. Those younger trees are going to be awesome deer browse. But if I'm in a more diverse timber where I have some oaks, I have some hickories, I have some elm, I'm less inclined to treat the stumps and more like just cut it flush and let
Yeah.
those sprouts come up for the browse. So I have that browse. But also my farm and other clients I try to work with, our goal is to like let's get that diversity of browse coming up, but it's also managed with fire. But also our fire
Hmm.
intervals are going to be a lot shorter than the South. I love studying the fire historical fire maps of the United States, and it's rough but probably pretty accurate. And one thing I did notice is like watching some of Dr. Lashley's videos. I think on Whitetail Properties is one showing the difference of limiting fire and the growth. I mean, you guys have a huge, longer growing season than we do. Seeing what
Hmm.
stuff can grow in 3 years, I'm like, yeah, I can't pull that off. But at the same time, we could still have a lot of quality browse forage, even in a more northern climate. And
Yeah.
I just was watching one of your shorts this morning showing some of these winter rosettes that pop up that are just
Hmm.
young, tender leaf. Man, I mean, these 50-degree days, you get a lot of stuff pops up in the wintertime, and it's still there, even, get some snow, some cold cover. The deer just
Yeah.
piss pound it, man, and it's
Yeah.
like, like this season, I noticed I did soybeans primarily just to clean up my food plot with Roundup. I had such a bad foxhole infestation. And man, they really hammered them hard. But at the same time, I know I have food around it, just natural browse that they can rely on. But
Hmm.
I just kind of really want to encourage guys to like go when you're going shed hunting, you're doing your TSI, look below the leaves, look down to that soil and see what's really there. And you'll follow the deer tracks and scat and see what they're really needing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing too, and I subscribe to this line of thought more and more with time, is that it's not all about tonnage. It's
Yes.
about diversity. And
Exactly. Right.
because, like, in winter, you might have a cornfield, and I mean, I've got properties where we've got corn where we're just keeping for deer, and it's awesome hunting, right? But that isn't everything that a deer needs. Like, a deer needs
Right.
variety,
Exactly.
and some of the older research that's been done on deer diet contents, even in the Appalachians where there's very little food in the understory, and during heavy mast years where there's a lot of acorns, whereas
Mm.
you would think it's like that's all deer are eating. It never makes up more than like 70 or 80% of the deer's rumen content. Um,
Hmm. Interesting.
and I don't know if you're much of a reader, but if you are, and if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read Nourishment. It's a
Nourishment.
book by a grazing ecologist, and it's not
Interesting.
about deer, but it's
Yep.
about ruminants and how they select forages and browse, and how they self-medicate, how they balance nutrient
Fascinating.
toxicities and deficiencies and everything. And so that's kind of that one line of thinking, and I feel like I see it more and more the more I open my eyes to not only focusing on what are deer pounding right now,
Hmm.
because I want that food, right? I
Yep.
don't want that on my neighbor. I want it on me, but I also want other foods
Exactly.
adjacent, because I don't
Right.
want that deer to have to leave to find, for instance, browse to balance out, too heavy of one nutrient in their rumen, or something that they're lacking.
Hmm.
And so, you know, you make a great case for promoting browse, and it's very important. But I think some landowners might sit there and say, "Well, I've got all this other food. I think I'm good.
Mm.
I've got a cornfield that I keep through the winter, or something like that." And if that's your speed, and you're all right with it, that's okay. But just
Yep.
understand, if you're only focused on one thing, you're probably missing the boat with deer. And
Exactly. Right.
for me, I want to make sure they have all the choice. I want them to have the most choices in the whole neighborhood on my property,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
it doesn't matter how obscure of a little plant it is,
Yes.
deer might eat it at some point. And if they do, I
Exactly.
definitely want to be the only guy in the neighborhood who has it.
Right.
And I can't prove any of this, because now I'm going to step out on a limb, but
Please
I,
do.
I get the inkling more and more that there's probably some very low prevalence species, herbs, in different times of the year. Some of
Yep.
them are cool season, some of them are warm season.
Yeah.
That a botanist would know the name, but I don't know them, because I'm like,
Sure.
how many, there's some kind of little obscure form. But we would, with some of those smaller plants, you would never notice that the deer were really eating them,
Sure.
unless you were down
Sure.
there on your hands and knees noting,
Right.
or you had an exclusion cage up in a random spot to see if they were
Yep.
absent or there. And so I can't prove any of that, because I'm not going to spend the time to go out there and do the surveys and
Sure.
do that sort of thing. But that line of thinking gets me to this point where I want to make sure I have tonnage. That's my corn. That's my maybe soybeans in summer. That might be, a cool season food plot that's providing a bunch of clover in spring, or what have you. But I'm also
Right.
focusing on these other things, and that's
Exactly.
right, woody browse. That's early succession. That's something with a lot of forbs in it, and I want to have as many stages of it as
Mm-hmm.
possible.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have different ages of disturbance, and I want to do everything I can. I mean, even with like an old field, to disturb it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Burn it in winter, sometimes burn it in summer. I'm going to throw in a random disking here and there.
Sure.
Like, I'm going to do different stuff, because I just
Yep.
want to provide as much opportunity as possible to have
Exactly.
diversity.
Exactly. Amen to that. No, I totally agree with you on that. Maybe obscure form might have a huge benefit for whitetail or whatever else. I'm reading this book. You really can't read it. It's more of like a glossary of the list of different medicinal native plants. And this
Mm-hmm.
gentleman, I forget the author's name already, but took all as many First Nations he could find, and somehow with a collection of other colleagues and work, categorized every native species on this continent and how each First Nation used each one. But
Wow.
one nation might look at a bark of white oak, for using a random example. I might be inaccurate on this, but one Cherokee might say, "Oh, this is great for dysentery, stopping it." Another nation might say, "This causes dysentery," depending on how you prepare it. So it's
Yeah.
fascinating to think about those, God, tens of thousands of years, these people here and developing this stuff through trial and error. But, it's the same concept applied to wildlife. The more
Mm-hmm.
diverse it is, we do know plant diversity increases soil health overall. which then also gives you a healthier plant community above as well.
Yeah.
So no, I'm totally with you there. And it doesn't matter if you can prove it or not. I think instinctually those animals just know.
Yeah. That's why I got to the point I just roll my eyes when people talk about diet selection based on how sweet something is, because it's just anthropomorphizing it,
Yes,
I
right.
have my own thoughts on that, even from a human standpoint. I think a lot of that is, I mean, it's instinctual that we seek out sugars and high fat foods, but
Sure.
it's also cultural. Like we've been taught
Exactly.
to like certain
Yep.
things. Anyway, I'm
Interesting.
not a big fan of that kind of justification to be like, this is all I worry about because it's quote unquote sweet. If a deer eats it, that's why I'm worried about it. I just want to have it there, and I want to have other things too.
Exactly. Right. Right. No, that's really cool. Um, I'm curious. We were talking earlier about your, and I'm really sorry. I haven't read the whole paper on your, I want to call it the Acorn study, but I feel disrespectful not giving you the full title of that paper. What was that research paper about?
First off, I don't remember the title, so no worries.
Oh,
It's
okay.
too
Wow.
long.
Okay.
It's a long sciencey title, right? I mean, it's something about acorn mediated something something or another. Um, so that project, I essentially simulated a mast year. This is in northern Mississippi in upland hardwoods, and I collected a bunch of acorns and kept them refrigerated, would pull them up over the weekend, and I would take them to this study site where there hadn't been a mass crop. I was actually taking Shumard oak
Oh,
acorns. So they're one red oak acorn, and I was putting them under southern red oak trees.
oh,
So there's a
okay.
little bit of a mismatch there. So if a deer was walking along and was like, that's not the right kind of acorn, I would have been
Interesting.
made. Yeah. But I was putting out acorns, and I had obviously bunch of control trees that I was monitoring with cameras, and then I had my experiment trees that I was monitoring and comparing usage over time and all. And then I had some seedlings there. So I had a mesic species, so I had a black gum, and then I had an oak seedling. And I was looking at not only predation of those acorns, but how that affects the plant community underneath. And
Wow.
that was that was kind of the ecological question I was seeking to answer there. But one of the bigger takeaways that I took from it, this was early on in my hunting of, so growing up I always just had smaller private properties I hunted, and
Sure.
whenever I went to Mississippi I kind of got thrown into just hunting public access, and so I was kind of early in the throes of that, and that really, at least for me, pushed me to have to read the landscape a lot more and not focus on just the little corner of the world that I could sit on. And so this was kind of early in all that, and one of the cool findings from that research project was that the deer that year, in that case on that property, delayed their usage of those acorns by 8 to 10 weeks before they really
Really?
started eating them. And so that's just one, that wasn't the point of the research, but that was a really cool takeaway. And that's just one anecdote. But it really made me start paying attention to that when I hunt. And that's something I think about a whole lot and spend a lot of time on every year, is looking at which species are masting,
Yeah.
when deer are using them and for how long. And I've the most consistent trend I found is that there's no consistent trend. It kind of
Sure.
changes every year.
Huh.
Um, and so this is kind of going back to that book Nourishment, and if we're thinking about nutrition across the landscape, we always, I think we're all kind of trained to think about selection of a food based on that food alone. So in the case
Right.
of,
Right.
let's say, white oak acorn, we're like, there's an acorn on the ground, deer are going to eat it because acorns are sweet, they want it.
Sure.
And there's probably a lot of truth to that. They're going to eat that. It's a high energy source for them. But it fails to recognize all of the other things that are going on, right?
Mm,
I mean, I
mm,
see it
mm.
on mast years. Deer definitely shift away from corn and beans. They definitely seem to use the woods more, and they shift their use. But I have to believe that if there's corn available, like a cornfield, or you had a really good food plot that fall versus not, that's going to change how deer use those
Oh,
woods.
sure. Yep.
And if we think about some of the rumen ecology and all of the different micronutrients and macronutrients that they're having to balance, because any nutrient, when it becomes too concentrated, is toxic, and then of
Yes.
course you can be deficient. No food out there, like the acorn doesn't have the perfect mix of everything a deer needs.
Sure.
That's why a deer has to balance it with other things. And so
Right.
again, we're getting into theoretical land that I can't really prove
Sure.
because it would take way too much money, and you'd probably have to replicate the heck out of it for like 50 years to make any sense of it. But my thought process is there's probably a variety of foods on the landscape that can be buffered with a said oak species, acorn, and that might drive when they really start to pound that acorn. The other thing going on is that
Mm.
acorns, of course, are full of tannins, but
Hmm.
guess what? Most forages have some amount of tannins. They're one of many secondary plant compounds that plants use as defenses against herbivores. And so, of
Sure. Sure.
course,
Yes.
acorns have a lot of tannins, and we all have heard that our whole lives. But so does browse.
Right.
The the little oak seedling out here with a bud on it
Yep.
has tannins to
Mm.
help guard against
Mm.
herbivory, and
Right.
so
Right.
it's not the
Interesting.
deer can't deal with tannins. They have proteins in their saliva that help bind
Yes.
with tannins and make them more digestible.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, there's actually there was a cool project I read the paper from a few years back. It was done in Europe, and I forget the name of the species. It was some woodland mouse, and they found that the stomach contents of those mice, their gastric and intestinal juices changed in the fall in a way that mirrored when their consumption of acorns spiked. And
No
so in the
kidding.
case of this little mouse, yeah, it seemed that they did a controlled study in a laboratory where they had mice that weren't exposed to the acorns, but
Wow.
their stomach still changed with the time of the year to have more of these
Wow. That's cool.
tannin binding proteins.
Is that similar to your study with the deer
Well,
delaying
I don't.
the browsing those acorns, do you think, or is it hard to say?
Yeah, there's no data on it that I'm aware of. I don't know, but I think that there could be something like that going
Wow.
on, along with all the other things obviously happening on the landscape.
Interesting.
I'm
I
not
just
aware of like replicated studies on deer looking at all of the
yeah,
different components of their intestinal system and seeing if they change throughout the year.
right?
But if we think about it from a deer's perspective, if we think about the year of the deer,
Yeah, right?
winter time is when they eat the highest tannin foods, and generally
Sure.
the buds, you know, so
Yep.
browse is real high in tannins. Some forages like forbs throughout the summer have tannins in them, but they're lower concentrations. Obviously, acorns have a lot of tannins, and so I would love if someone out there would do the research, but it would take a lot of time and a lot of money to do all the analyses. But it would be really cool, and hopefully someday we have an answer to that question, and whether or not deer's bodies change preemptively to be able to consume acorns.
Wow.
Anyway, I go all down this path to justify my saying I really don't know why or when deer eat a particular acorn or the other.
Sure.
There's all kinds of different explanations, and that's why I roll my eyes when anyone says, "Oh, they don't eat white oak acorns in the winter because they soured." I hear that all the time. Or they only eat white oaks because they're sweet. Well, I've seen with my own two eyes where they're walking right past swamp chestnut oaks and white oaks to eat a cherry bark dropping. Why that tree over another? Who knows?
Right.
Individual trees, the nutritional content in their acorns varies. There could be
Right.
some macronut or some micronutrient that
Sure.
tree had because of a site issue with the soil there.
Right.
It was providing something that those deer were limited on, and it was creating a pool. I don't
Man, you
know,
just
but at the end of
create a
the
whole
day,
new obsession for me.
yeah, at the end of the day, we could get all down in the weeds of all this, and I love to, but my takeaway is pretty simple in that I'm like, okay, as a manager, I really just need to focus on diversity. I don't need to
Exactly.
focus only
Key
on
thing.
white oaks because I think that's a temptation for people to be like, oh, well, deer only like white oaks. Throw out all the red oaks. Well, red oaks are important to a whole lot of other species. First off,
Absolutely.
they're naturally here, but I've made a pretty good case, hopefully, for keeping those because one year they might be vitally important. And I don't want my neighbor getting all my deer because they're over there eating the pin oaks that I cut
Yes.
down so that
Right.
I could promote
Yes.
white oaks,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, we just need to have diversity. But from a hunting standpoint, it's kind of maddening because it seems to change every year. But it's also kind of the fun of it, right? I mean, we get to
Absolutely. Right.
learn, scout, test things out, adapt, be successful, and then you kind of got to redo it every year.
Exactly. We're going to take one quick pause and then we will be right back.
No worries.
Okay, we're back. I love these kind of conversations. I don't care if they could go down the rabbit trail. I just think it's really fun to talk about. But I want to say you guys have your podcast, Wildlife Investments podcast, and I gotta be honest with you, it's right up there with Wild Turkey Science. I love the quality of that nuanced conversation because I got good friends that have their own habitat podcast, and they do excellent work. But the one thing I love the nuance in the examples and studies that can really give people more to work with besides like, well, let's hinge cut over here. Let's do this little microplot over here. All valid stuff, but I just think the science really helps promote that importance of land diversity and really trying to be a land steward and managing upland timber or prairie, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you're focused on, I guess. So the first episode I listened to, there was a really good conversation about um, trying to hunt these early successional stands that we're managing for. And like you're just saying, I think these kind of improvements can really reteach us as hunters. Cause I think, especially in the whitetail community, I think all of us are guilty of being too dependent on that food plot. Like your food plot, it might look beautiful, but there's a big mass drop, and some of us get stuck in a rut like, where are the deer? There's no deer. Well, they're in the timber enjoying, gorging themselves on acorns. So, you, the management you've done and hunting that you've done, do you have any advice for hunters that are they're doing the work, but the deer patterns have changed because for whatever reason, October, November, there's a forb over here that they're really gorging on before they go to the next corner bean stand? What are some things guys can adapt these management practices into their actual hunting season?
Yeah, I think in general, when you're laying out a property, you can be pretty intentional with how you create rut hunting situations. And I normally just think about if I have topography to work with, some of those topographical features that are already going to make deer movement a little bit more predictable. And then I love to compound that if I'm already going to have some kind of
Mm,
cover edge. It might be an interior forest edge where it's a fire break, or I'm going to do
mm-hmm.
FSI over here, not over there. Like I'll try to create it in such a way that it just makes that existing movement a little bit better. And then so those should be timeless places, right? And so
Right.
during the rut, they're going to be good regardless of what's happening with the food. Um, on the other side of things, depending on the size of your property, you can become pretty familiar with what you have where,
Right.
and
Right.
then change your hunting based on what you know to be true from other observations, even if they aren't on that property. Of course, you've got to be careful about blowing deer out and not
Yes.
overly pressuring them. And so that's kind of where there has to be a balance between scouting, because scouting during the season sometimes is the only way to figure out some of the stuff going on.
Right.
But if we
Right.
take like, let's take the mast. I would say one of the biggest things that changes year to year is, of course, which species of oaks are masting. Now,
Right.
what deer are doing with them when is a little bit less predictable. But what I do every year before I even set foot in the woods is just start taking note of what species of oaks are dropping. And so,
Mhm.
if you want to be a plant nerd, start by
Yep.
learning the oak species that you have around,
Right.
and your Kroger or Walmart or wherever you shop, Rural King or whatever, it's probably going to have some oaks around it. The bank will. Just start, like, literally, you can start paying attention going to the grocery store, and you'll start
Yeah.
to see, hey, we've got a really good white oak crop this year. Oh, well, I've got that ridge that is really good every time I have a white oak crop, and I've got to stand up there. There you go. You didn't have to set foot
Right.
there to have a pretty good idea that you'll have food. And
Yes.
so that's something I do regardless of whether I'm hunting, a private spot or on, any kind of public land, is
Hmm.
figure out what is producing mast. In the case of a property you're not very familiar with, and I do this all the time on like national forest or whatever, if you have a lot of topography or a lot of differences in site conditions, so it could be you have some real wet bottoms where the only thing that's going to grow down there, like in the south, is overcup oak, swamp chestnut oak. Up
Mm.
where you're at, it might be pin oak, and
Yeah.
kind of know where those species are going to exist based on site.
Yeah.
So even if you haven't been to a spot, if you learn to ID trees and you learn to pay attention to the conditions they grow in, you can be pretty good about predicting, or at least having a good idea where those trees are going to be, and that can cut out a lot of the landscape that you don't have to go traipsing around to
Right.
figure
Right.
out or check on those spots. And so Like I do that with northern red oaks. Up where I hunt in Indiana, when it's a good northern red oak year, it's one of my favorite trees to hunt. It seems like late into the season, deer continually use those really well and seem to like them a lot. And for the most part, those northern red oaks grow on north facing slopes,
Mm-hmm.
east facing slopes, and a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
they grow lower on the slope and they grow in
Mm-hmm.
better soils. So I can already throw out all of the chestnut and scarlet oak ridge tops that are super dry. It's not going to happen there. If
Mm.
there's not acorns there, I'm not going to worry about them.
Right.
Then I just have like I still have a lot of area to check out, but I'm not going to be going 200 foot up and down, 200, to
Right.
to
Right.
check the top when I know like that's not the site where northern red oaks are going to be on that forest.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. No, that makes sense. And one thing I was putting myself in. Yeah, how can I put this? Thinking about my farm, and it's surrounded by ag, and those deer, they want diversity. They want those forbs, but they're also going to hit a cornfield or alfalfa field regardless because they want that diversity. And it's just kind of like, I think for folks in the Midwest that have those broken up timber stand and ditches and whatnot, I hate to call them ditches, but that's what they kind of are. It's just left
Yeah.
over from blah blah blah. But just hunting between a bedding slash browsing area, going to an egg field like we traditionally do, will, I think, really help without blowing out deer going to those areas. I guess some folks maybe deem as a sanctuary area, but
Mm-hmm.
still being managed properly, But
Yeah.
at least you might be able to concentrate deer going to those areas because you have a higher stand of quality browse than that time of year.
Yeah. Yeah. I so a lot of times if I'm going to have like a sanctuary area or an area I would try to promote really good cover and leave alone. If I can, I would prefer to do it in an area where there's not oak trees. Like you
Oh,
got a little black locust patch or somewhere that's already just like I love
not
it. It's already
grassy.
a little brushy, right? But
Yeah.
somewhere that's not going to have a lot of oaks.
Hmm.
Again, in a perfect world, I would choose a spot that
Interesting.
doesn't have oaks so that the deer have to move out to,
Oh,
go to
I
a more
gotcha.
predictable spot.
Right. That's
And,
cool.
and then you don't have to also go traipsing in there looking for oaks every year. You kind of know, yeah, yes, I know what's in
Right.
there. It's a bunch of deer, and I don't want to blow them out. Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting.
yeah.
No, that's a good point. One thing, have you adapted fire in the fall for your hunting?
Myself, no. On some of the properties I work with, yes. Um, and what I like about, and I'm going to call late summer, fall fire.
Sure.
Let's just say anything from like August to, well, for y'all up there, it would probably be August. Down in the south, sometimes it's even the 1st of November. You can actually get some green resprout, and that, I mean, it can be a really good draw in hunting
Mm-hmm.
season. I've seen it myself, and similar to like you were referring to that old field where when you pull back all the duff, you have all of these basal rosettes.
Yep.
You get that same effect when you top kill everything. From what I've seen, you've got to get pretty late into fall for those species not like for there not to be a resprout. Essentially, if they're
Mm-hmm.
if they're green and growing, they're going to resprout. And so
Mm-hmm.
you do that and you have a month left of growing season, you're going to have a month of the most tender growth on the landscape. And what I like about it the most is that doesn't exist anywhere else. Like it,
Yeah, that's true.
you're not
Yep.
competing with anybody. You have the only blackberry that is 6 inches tall of regrowth, and that deer hammer it for sure.
Right. And that's one thing I really would like to adapt, but I have so much basal area on the ground right now. And it's kind of like, and it's kind of that when to fit it in because
Yeah,
I have a tendency to have a naturalist mindset, try to replicate as much with historical data we have to replicate that. But also, I'm like, well, I mean, I'm sure in the past 10,000 years there was a fall fire at some point, obviously,
yeah,
but it's kind of like when and where. You know, and part of me is like, I'm not too worried if it screws up my hunt or not screw it up. It just might change things, I should say. But it's that proper time placement and like how
yeah,
late's too late. You know what I mean? So no, that's the fun of it.
yeah. Yeah, at least in the South, I mean, we traditionally have a pretty good drought at the end of summer, and it
Mm,
is kind of a natural little fire window there.
sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, going into fall.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that kind of stuff's obviously always changing, but at least right now, if you think of if we were to make a wild assumption, I think it's probably not fully true, but if we were to have the same kind of drought a few hundred years ago, there would have to be lightning strike fires happening. It would
Exactly.
also be
Right.
a great time for somebody to light it on fire because
Yeah.
it is so dry.
Did you, I just thought of this, thinking about the First Nation people, like probably deciding to burn in the fall. Did you catch that episode of Meat Eater with Steve Rennell in Tanzania?
Um, yeah, where they're talking about burning,
Yeah, and they're
lighting
just
stuff up. Yeah,
dropping random matches as they
yeah,
go, and I'm like, that is so wild, but awesome at the
yeah,
same time. Like, I want to do that. Just like, this thing's too thick. Let's burn it and get it going.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, when you so we manage our landscapes at way too small of a scale, obviously, for that to work
Right.
because we have property lines and all this kind of
Yep.
stuff. But if you there's some parts of the country, so like the sand hills
Mm,
in North Carolina that I talked about earlier with the longleaf pine there. And the really cool thing about that is so the uplands are all longleaf, and then the
yes.
drains are full of native bamboo, so river cane. And
Oh, wow.
it's thick and tall, right?
Cool.
And it holds a lot of moisture underneath. It's a natural fire break.
Oh,
And
okay.
so you think
Yeah.
about like it was
Neat.
everywhere. There were
Right.
fire breaks everywhere. You had big rivers, but then every little drain, at least in that system, is a good fire break. And I would think that 99 times out of 100, it would absolutely stop the fire. And so,
Oh, sure.
if you're thinking about somebody who's like, okay, if they were lighting it on fire and then they didn't obviously have bulldozers, they were just lighting it to manage it.
Yeah,
All they'd have to do is get on the other side of that cane break and
exactly. Right.
they're good, right? They're in a different fire unit
It kind of
of
makes
their
you
landscape.
wonder if some bands in these First Nations may have had upset, like, damn it, Jeremy, why'd you light that up? We were still over here. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't give their neighbors a heads up. Hey, we're going to burn this
Yeah.
today. So
That was our
I'm
sanctuary. All our big bucks were in there.
all the
Yeah.
bison are gone. Thanks a lot. No, that's funny to
Yeah.
think about. Moriah, I really appreciate your time. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate the work you do down there because I can try to preach a good word of this Southern conservation gospel up here, and hopefully, guys keep taking a note to it. But this might be kind of a big question to end with, but I'm curious: do you have concerns or hope regarding the future conservation in your career? What are things that you're seeing that we need to change on, or you're concerned about, or your overall view as you've had this career so far?
Um, that question's kind of twofold.
Mm,
If we're just talking about deer, the only concern I have is just how CWD shapes deer hunting in the future.
yes,
I
absolutely.
don't I for one don't believe deer will be extirpated because of it. I think deer
Right.
will survive, but it
Yep.
inevitably will change age structures and just will
Right.
change how deer hunting's experienced, which is again why I think we're in the heyday. It will never be this good again. And most people don't want to hear that, but it
It's
is a
true.
valid concern. It's not the sky is falling, but if all you cared about is a 6.5-year-old buck that scores 200 inches, there's going to be a whole lot less of those in the future. So
Exactly.
gear up.
Unfortunately.
So that's one side of it. And I don't think that's all doom and gloom. I think there's, and there might be some natural resistance at some point. You roll the dice enough times, there might be a genotype that is truly, resistant. There has
Yeah.
not been one yet, but it could happen.
Yep.
And then the other side is just, the bigger picture issues we've always dealt with that I have never gone away, which is um, just all the things happening on the landscape. There's
Right.
constantly habitat going away. If we're talking about
Yep.
conservation as a whole, you know, pollution is still
Yeah.
a huge issue. We have all
Yeah.
kinds of issues with pollution. We still have our natural areas disappearing and being developed into houses every single day. Those things aren't going away, and they
Right.
probably will continue to eat away at it. And so those are probably a lot more important than our age structure of whitetail deer going from
Yes.
4.5 to 3.5. But yeah, those are the things that I'd be more concerned about in the future for sure.
Right. Well, it kind of reminds me of Kyle Libarger. That guy will have I love that guy so much, but he'll have a short, like, look at this purple, what's that one called? Purple prairie clover. And then he's like, they're developing over here. Our pines is gone forever. And I'm like, man,
Yeah.
it's a challenging thing, and I think the Midwest, I don't know, I can't speak on development, but just the push of agriculture. I was talking with a guy for like an hour and a half the other day, and, you know, he's a farmer, but he's a conservationist, which is a very rare blend, and he's like, our farmers make the excuse of, I don't have any money, so I got to push the timber in to farm.
Yeah.
I had so much money, now I have a write-off on hiring the dozer guy to farm more. And it's like, I don't want to get in the whole debacle, but at the same time, it is concerning. But also, I think these kind of conversations can hopefully inspire a little flame for folks to really know that they can make a difference in the landscape and use that as an example, kind of as a
Yeah.
witness your own property as a portfolio for other conservationists, or kind of people don't know they're conservationists yet, so,
Yeah.
but no, I agree with you. As soon as I get on Instagram and I see like some other sludge spill in Appalachia, and you're like, God dang it, and it
Yeah.
doesn't directly affect me, but it does, because I have friends that way, and it's like, man, this is our landscape now, and we have a responsibility to take care of it, whether it's, when to burn or when to say enough's enough, So no, I really
Right.
appreciate you sharing those insights.
Yeah. I have a hard time squaring the circle that is economy first and
Yes,
conservation first. They just don't go.
it's challenging,
There's a trade off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, and like you have to make room for both.
yes,
But you're talking about the destruction of wetlands and stuff. Those are very sensitive systems that
mhm,
we can't just create those again. We can't snap our fingers and plant it back and it be the same hydrology that it used to be. And
right.
thank goodness I'm not a farmer because that sounds like an awful, awful hard way to make a living. And I don't envy people in that situation. I think there's probably some bigger macro problems pushing them to have to do that kind of
Absolutely,
stuff just to try to keep
right.
their head afloat. But it is sad when we lose those types of things that we'll never get those back. And you can only remove things that you'll never get back for so long before you've removed it all. And
Exactly, right. You can't
that's
get
the
it
kind of
back.
thing.
You can try. Well, I've had a good conversation with Jace about this very topic of the trying to replicate what historically was happened, but it's not quite the same. There's just been too
Yeah.
much disturbance. You can get it close, but at the same time, we know that more sunlight. It depends on the biota, but it's a positive thing. And fire, and that seems to be the most positive response that we can do as of now. But also just keep encouraging people about conservation. And I gotta
Yeah.
wave my copy of a Sand County Almanac like I do my Bible. It's like, I
Yeah.
read this. Yeah, absolutely. Moriah, where can people find you at if they would like to reach out for consultations?
Um, on Instagram or Facebook at Wildlife Investments. That's the easiest way to find us. We
Perfect.
also have a website, same thing,
Cool.
wildlifeinvestments.com.
Cool. We will leave links down below. Anything else before we end this wonderful conversation, sir?
No, I enjoyed it, Jesse. We've talked before on the phone about
Yeah.
trees and plants and all the fun stuff. So it's fun to finally get to join you on a podcast. I enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's kind of cool finding another bird of the same feather. Awesome. Well, we'll leave links down below for people to reach out to Moriah and check out their Instagram. There's a lot of cool education stuff on there. And thanks again for listening to the episode of the Beast of Burden podcast.